what you want, when you want it, where you want it. This is The Mesh. Leadership GPS. Insightful conversations about leadership and what it takes to be successful in today's rapidly changing organizations.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Leadership GPS here on themesh.tv. This is our ongoing podcast audio show talking about the world of leadership, talking about ways to transform people from managers or just employees in an organization to strong leaders, helping those that are already in leadership positions look at ways to strengthening what they do for their organization, and really just trying to look at the art of leadership, I guess, as it stands, and some of the things that we can help reinforce from a do's and don'ts standpoint, and some things to keep in mind with that. With me, as always, my co-host on the show, Tony Jackson, Tony Dad Jackson. So I'm going to kind of get the naming down pat on this, whether we go with Dad or Tony.
It's about time you don't had 40 years to work on
I kind of fluctuate a little bit between it on the show. Of course, Tony and I, Dad and I, work together on a daily basis, so we get to experience that dynamic quite a bit, both of us working in different levels of leadership. Dad, how are you doing today?
I'm doing okay, Alan, son.
Yeah, Alan, right. Son. Just refer to me as son. That's nice and formal. I like that. Okay. So, of course, Tony's with Drive Leadership, a part of our business that focuses on helping transform people from just managers to leaders, to true strong leaders through a very customized, unique approach, working with small groups within organizations to help them move to that next level. And I'm with the Jackson Group, a part that Tony Jackson started many years ago, and I'm now running it, which specializes in both employee and patient satisfaction surveys, customer satisfaction surveys, market perception, community perception surveys, trying to help collect data around what we want to learn from our different populations. So it's a good synergy between the two companies we have there and the two lines of work we do. But today we're bringing in kind of a new third component. And yes, we're keeping it in the family, as we do have with us our special guest, my brother, Tony's son, Dr. Brian Jackson, who is the professor of performance psychology and kinesiology at Pacific University. How you doing, Brian?
I'm doing great.
Hey, Brian, son. How you doing?
Brian, son, brother, as I will call you, brother from here on out.
That's right.
Mr. Jackson. Yeah.
Well, Brian is not only a professor there, as I mentioned, but also the director of the tennis program, heading up the tennis programs for both the men's and women's tennis teams there at Pacific University, located in beautiful Forest Grove, Oregon,
yes,
which we've had the pleasure of visiting before and really enjoyed our time out there. Glad to have you here for the holidays, getting family together, and you and your wife, Laura, visiting with us again for the holiday season here. So glad to have you.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
Figured it'd be a good time to fire up the mics and let's talk a little bit about leadership, because you're actually in a role where you've got a lot of expertise with leadership as well, but from a little bit different slant on things. And I think it's going to be interesting to kind of see some of the change in dynamics. Yeah. As we talk about teams, that's our big thing we're going to focus on today, is talking about the idea of teams. Not only because in leadership we deal with teams, we have teams of employees, we have teams of other leaders, but also in the sports world, of course, that's where we typically think of the word team. Sports teams, athletic teams, that's kind of the normal vernacular we have out there in society when we think of a team. So we want to talk a little bit about that structure of team in an athletic environment versus, or how it's very similar to a corporate business world as well. Sound like a good topic to you guys?
Yeah.
Sounds
good. You guys got some stuff to talk about with that?
Tons of connections. Yeah,
awesome.
I think this would be great.
Well, before we get started, just as a quick reminder to everybody, you are listening to this podcast on themesh.tv. That is our online media network of new media, audio and video programs that are available for free. You can find out all the shows on themesh.tv. Every episode of every show we have is available on the website. You can go and download it, play it live on the website. And there's no cost with any of the broadcasts of these episodes. But we really want you to actually consider going on to Apple iTunes, go to the podcast store and find this show or any other shows and hit the little subscribe button. That lets you know that every time we put out a new episode of this show, it gets automatically delivered to your inbox, to your iTunes program. You don't have to go and hunt it out. We'll deliver it to you if you hit that subscribe button. So that's really what we'd like to see you do. If you like the show, give us some feedback, star ratings on the iTunes store as well. We always appreciate that. So guys, let's go ahead and talk about teams. And I guess the whole message here is we're going to talk a little bit about the idea of teams. Are they really all that important in the grand scheme of things? We're in a world where individual performance is normally highlighted quite a bit, especially in the sports world. We have celebrities, we have big pro athletes that are known much more for individual performances. But we've got a business world as well where you've got star performers and people who are your great employees, but you also have this concept of teams and building teams. So let's talk a little about when we say teams and we talk about this idea of a team, what does that mean to you guys when you really hear it as the term team or teamwork or teamship, whatever it may be? How does that translate? What does that mean to you in your world and what you do on a daily basis?
I'll start it off because I don't know.
You don't know.
Well, I know it's weird coming from me, but let me tell you my own bias about this, Alan.
Okay.
I think the term team or teamship or teamwork, all those are fuzzy terms that are just about as fuzzy as the word leader, leadership, those things we talk about all the time. Mm-hmm. You get 12 people off the streets and ask them what a team is, you're going to get 12 different responses. Same thing about leadership. So I think there's a lot of common use of the term team, just like leader and leadership. But really, when you boil it down, I think it boils down to the fact that people say, well, I know it when I see it, but I don't know really what it is sometimes.
Okay.
Now, to me, if I had to put a definition on it, it's a group of people working together in a very synergistic way, which means there's a larger outcome than just a combined efforts of those people towards a common goal. But that's pretty textbook stuff. Brian, what do you think? You look at it from the sports world as well as psychology, I know. So.
Yeah, I mean, this is something we talk about all the time because the idea of it, a group is greater than the sum of the parts, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, the whole reason that comes about is because there's some connection between individuals that if you took them individually and said you do your part and then added them together, they're probably not going to be as effective as if you put them all together and had them work with each other. So it's the basketball analogy of having a great team atmosphere where people tend to work well together. You can't just go get the 5 best athletes and automatically assume they're going to be a great team. So to me, the team is when they're starting to work together, and you've got individuals that are trying to help one another, and therefore going beyond what they could do alone. And you could, as I said, you could take those individuals, put them on the field, put them on the court, and they may individually do really well, but there's got to be some kind of special connection that has to develop in order for you to take that to a higher level to make it a team. You can have a group of people, and a group of people becomes a team, I think, when the interaction is there, when they make each other better. And
so is the argument almost that and trying to look at the synergy between business world and sports world, if you hired a group of employees that were really, really good employees individually, they had great skill sets, great experience, and you drop them in the place and said, okay, your job is now to all of you together do this thing, but they're not really working as a team, even though they may have a shared goal. I mean, is it still a team even if they're all kind of doing their own thing and there's not really any connection between them as employees? I mean, it's the same idea as the sports world. I mean, you get the NBA team together and say, all right, our goal is to win the championship, but if they're all working as an individual just to get the best stats they can on the board, is it still going to work as well,
Well, I struggle with that, Alan, because a lot of times, I practice my trade mostly in healthcare arenas, not exclusively, but mostly so. And sometimes people use the word team in a healthcare setting to simply mean the people working in a similar area doing similar things, a unit, a floor, nurses on a floor, whatever it might be. But when you start spreading those out, and geographic areas disperse from each other so they don't have constant interaction and contact, the concept of team really falters there because there's not that, like you said, that not reinforcing each other. It's possible. So a lot of it has to do with the organizational dynamics, organizational structure, the leadership of those groups or teams, and whether or not the clear objective is really there. And I just don't see that often enough in my world of healthcare as I'd like to. I mean, if everybody thinks, I'm going to do this because it's for the good of patient care, that's the ultimate objective. That's great. That's a lot of times it's like, well, I'm going to do this because they told me to do it and, get through the day type of thing.
Well, in the business world, if you put people in individual offices and never let them communicate with one another and say, do your job the best you can do, you have to assume there's some loss in productivity there, right? I mean, if there's no interactions between them, then there's no efficiency. There's no, if I did this, Alan may benefit from this, and if I worked with him, he's got a better way of doing it than I do, and then all of a sudden we become better. That's, I think, when the team develops, right? Other than that, it's just naming someone. I mean, you could put someone in the category of salesman, but if they're not working together, I certainly wouldn't call them a team.
There's not a team of sales, but that's right. You might call it a sales team, but usually that's a support person with a salesperson, with a marketing person, whatever. But yeah, I understand.
Well, so what is the role of a leader in looking at the team and even helping build that team out? Because it sounds like to me, from what you guys are saying, you get some good talented people, you put them together, you give them a goal or a mission or objective, but they're not necessarily going to be a team unless they're encouraged, motivated, structured to be so. And that sounds like that's all down to the leader at that point. So when we look at building a team, what is the role of a leader in helping build that team out? What should a leader be doing to really build a good team to make it work as good as possible?
Well, from my standpoint, again, it starts with expectations of the leader that's made by the organization that leader works for. Mm-hmm. I don't know, again, that a lot of leaders are told part of what we expect of you as a leader is to develop a team mentality, a team culture within your work groups. It's assumed that they should, but it's usually by default. And going back to Brian's example, I could look at your tennis teams, for example. Mm-hmm. You call them tennis teams,
yep.
Although they're individual performers, and when they're playing singles, it's the individual effort, individual type thing.
Yep.
Playing doubles, I could see that. That's a team of doubles,
Right.
And then the hand signals, how they communicate with each other, knowing in advance where they're going to be and positioning and work that out in advance. That collaboration has to occur. But how do you apply that to your tennis team as individuals, at the concept of team?
Yeah, and that's the toughest part, right? Because you have a bunch of individuals who have grown up playing a sport that is individual. Mm-hmm. Just like if you bring in a salesperson and they've done it on their own for many years, and they're used to being self-reliant. They don't need anyone else to be able to do their crap, just like my tennis players don't. But my goal is, if all I needed was to have the 6 best tennis players and just put them on the court, then I could go ahead and predict that we win matches,
right. Mm-hmm.
Right. Without even practicing. But obviously my hope is that we go beyond what we could have done. So to me, that's the beauty of a sport like tennis, track, swimming, where the individual performance is what counts. But the goal is, how do you get those individuals to do better than they would be if they were on their own? And,
right.
In the high school ranks, they're dealing with this issue now, is that you'll have, Alan and I played high school tennis together, and, you had individuals that nowadays, if they're really, really good and say better than everyone else that's around there, they say, I'm going to be better if I just practice on my own. Mm-hmm. If I go and practice on my own, I'll get to a certain level. But every coach will say, I need you here at least a certain point in time. Mm-hmm. And why is that? Because there's some benefit that they're going to give to everyone else. Even if you're the best person, you're going to have something rub off on everyone else, or you're going to have this team mentality of motivation that's going to come from it. So as a coach, as a leader, to me, it's the most important thing to figure out how do you get individuals to stay motivated with one another, to realize that what they do could help someone else in getting their best out of their game.
Well, let me
interrupt you, because your question about the role of the leader in making a team. Mm-hmm. Does that mean a trickle down effect from the leader? It has to start with the leader. The language, you used the word a while ago, we, a lot. Mm-hmm. The individual players playing their game so that we win the match, and we can predict that we will win this match and all that. Yep. You didn't say so that Robbie will win his match, that type of thing.
Right.
So is it the role of the leader to trickle it down?
Well, I think it's the role of the leader to be part of that team. I think that's the important piece, is that the leader has to be a member of that team. I can't say that this is the team, right, and I am someone who directs the team, because I think I'm not listening to my own coaching at that point, right? Mm-hmm. I'm telling them that you're the number 1 player, but you can make the number 2 player better. And if you guys work together, you're going to be better than you would be alone. Same thing for me. I would assume that if I'm not working with them, if I'm not helping them achieve their best, then I'm not really doing the team mentality. I could be the best coach I could be without working with them. I could go and recruit, and I could go and manage, and I could go and budget, and I can do all the things I need to do. But if I'm not working with them, then that's the team itself is suffering, right? So to me, the leader has to be part of that team. And also we have to kind of talk about what leaders are we speaking about, because in my world, there's many leaders. There's not just the coach. Coach is usually the one that the buck stops here, but it's in the sports psychology world, we call it the difference between appointed leaders and emerging leaders.
Mm-hmm. Appointed and emerging.
Appointed, okay. Yeah. And appointed, I'm an appointed leader, right? I've been given a title. Yeah. I've been given a job. and I have things that I need to accomplish. But then you also have emerging leaders, which are usually players, team members that step up and actually make everyone better, even though they may not be asked to make someone better. So usually our team captains. Those are people that I don't just go and point to them and say, you're a captain. I wait to see who is the catalyst, who's naturally the one that's going to make everybody better.
But can't there be toxic leaders? I know that's one topic we're going to be talking about later on with somebody from an officer from the Army later on. But we're assuming that the term leader is a positive one. But
Right.
you can be a leader towards evil objectives, or bad things, right?
Well, yeah.
Yep.
And that's that guy that sticks out in your team that's lousy to be around. He's not good for the team, but everybody listens to him.
Yep.
They're all affected by him. Is that true or not true?
Oh, totally. Yeah, and I think the term motivation, right, means a lot. Actually just means to move someone in a particular direction.
Yeah, that's right.
It doesn't necessarily mean to move them in a positive direction.
Right.
So, I could have emerging team leaders that is that individual who is lazy and really wants his position given to him, and he wants everyone else to feel the same way. And so all of a sudden he's the bad apple that causes everyone else to have issues. So all of a sudden I have a leader that's motivating them in the wrong way, right? Motivating them to question my authority, motivating them to try to get out of doing some of the things that we know is going to be helpful.
He's the one that on the side will tell a team member, if it were a colleague, I'm not going to practice today. You have to go practice. Come on, let's go, whatever, right?
Yeah.
Well, he's the individual that in the corporate world that
Exactly.
I would imagine doing the hallway conversations, right?
When we do our
It's a
surveys,
negative culture,
when we do our surveys with employees, and we ask specifically for those new employees in an organization, when they join their department or work group or unit, were they welcomed by the other employees there? Do they feel supported and positive by the other employees? And you'll normally find there's those pockets where you've got some of those employees that maybe been there a really long time, maybe a little more jaded than others, have that toxic mentality to it, and it affects the new people coming into the team pretty quickly. That's where the leader's role, the true leader, has to really be a lot more aggressive in making sure that their term of leadership, their tone of leadership and teamwork permeates throughout the department to kind of counteract.
So that's the appointed leader you're talking about, like Brian was talking about.
Yeah, you run the risk of letting an emerging leader in a department or work area be that toxic leader. And all of a sudden, if the appointed leader isn't able to control that, it can get out of hand pretty quick. I would imagine the same way in a team, too.
It's exactly that way. And then you also have the individuals that feel threatened by the person you appoint as a leader. That happens often, right? The person that's been there for a long time, they think they need to be the leader. And then sometimes even the person that you do appoint all of a sudden, has a kind of a God complex that comes about that says, well, I'm going to now force everyone to do that. Well, in my area, you often are appointing leaders as captains or as, a person who's in charge of doing some workouts in the morning. They have no training in being a leader whatsoever. So you're hoping you pick someone that has natural ability to be able to do that. But oftentimes you have a toxic leader that emerges. And if your team cohesion, if your culture has not been strong enough, then it will take over. And that's why it's really important, I think, to develop that team culture in your environment that's strong enough that those individuals get pushed out right away.
Yeah.
And, they're not allowed to be toxic.
So, and this is a loaded question because I know there's an easy answer to this first part of it, but obviously there's a lot of benefits to having a team, having people work in a team as opposed to working individually. But just humor me. What are some of those real advantages, some really sharp advantages that we get when people are working together, the leaders are on the same page, everybody's working together? What really accomplishes, what can come out of that, ideally, in any situation?
Well, one that we kind of alluded to is positive peer pressure. Peer pressure sometimes can be a negative thing, obviously, but it depends on the direction. But positive peer pressure, I want to be a part of that group. I want to be a part of that group. I want to do like they do because they're somebody I admire. But that really comes about after the fact sometimes because, first of all, there has to be some synergy between people as individuals. I've never seen a team made up of people that don't like each other, okay? In fact, it's been said, and I wrote them down a few minutes ago, that in order to have a cohesive team, one that sticks together, through thick and thin, bad years on the tennis courts and that type of thing, losing records or whatever. Not that you would know anything about that, Brian. No.
Oh, no, yeah.
And I know you wanted me to bring it up, that what a great coach you are and how you've turned that team around.
You're exactly right. I didn't want you to
And you have done a miraculous job with that team out there.
Maybe it's
you
the
really
note I
have.
slid you a minute ago. Please bring this up. But yeah.
But the 4 factors that make it for a cohesive team are frequent substantive interaction, meaning something happens because they're together and communicate well together, but it has to be frequent. You can't communicate well and have frequent substantive interaction from 4 corners of the world, and have a teamship. You have to have norms or expectations. To be a part of this team, you do this, or you do these things this way, or we feel this way. Those are the norms, expected behaviors. They're not always stated. They're not always known. They're not written down. Sometimes they're just assumed. Okay, it's like whether you wear a tie to a meeting or not, so you don't stand out. There's group norms. Consensus. Teams have a way that evolves about how we make decisions together, how we make decisions. And it's not just voting and that sort of stuff, but something happens when a team is functioning well where the voice of one represents the voice of all. Okay? And then the last one is sentiment. And that sounds like a mushy term, but sentiment is not sentimentality. It's sentiment meaning, I like the other people here on my team. I don't have any problems with them. There might be a standout in there, but for the most part, I like these people as people.
Right.
And the teams are formed around that a lot of times. And I'm just, that social aspect of being a team, I think, is a real critical missing difference sometimes, because in the fast-paced world of like healthcare work right now, where everybody's stretched thin, they don't have time to develop those relationship issues sometimes. I mean, they should.
Yeah.
And they want to. And we know employees want to from our surveys, Alan. But I don't know if that's there. But those 4 ingredients have to be present to have a cohesive team, from what the textbooks say.
Well, the only thing I would maybe add or even adjust to that is that I'm not sure I agree that everyone has to like each other to be part of an effective team.
Okay, well, thanks for your time today, Brian. I appreciate that. We'll invite you back maybe some other time.
No, I do like you too. Okay, so we're going to be an effective team.
So we're a team here? Okay.
Yeah. But I will say I've been parts of effective teams. Now, maybe they weren't as effective as they could have been. Maybe that's the issue, where you didn't necessarily like each other. But you do have to respect each other. And to me, with teams, and that's one of the hard parts, is I would imagine there's a lot of people that step into a leadership position where they don't necessarily get to choose who's underneath them.
Yeah.
So, okay, you're appointed as a manager now, and here are your people. Well, if all of a sudden you don't like those people, doesn't mean necessarily that you can't be effective. But I think there has to be some respect given. And usually with my team, there's a talk at the beginning of the year that said, the person next to you, if you don't respect them, we're in trouble. Right? Because if you don't respect what they're going to do on the court, you don't have to like them to where you hang out together when you get off the court. You don't have to have this as your best friend. It helps, right? If they are your best friend, then we're going to be even better, right? Yeah. But if you have individuals who don't necessarily like each other, but they can respect,
as long as they have
that person has
level.
A job to do and they do it well.
Yeah.
I have a job to do, I do it well. I don't necessarily need to go and interact with them every day.
Sure.
I think you can still be effective. Are you going to be as good? No, right? But I do think that you can be effective. That it's harder to be effective, and that's one of the biggest challenges that I've ever had as a coach is when you have individuals that don't get along, to try to find some way or another that they can cross paths and still respect each other, and that's extremely tough.
So how active are you in trying to make that different for them? I mean, are you command and control type of leadership at that point in time? You guys get your act together, or is it you nurture it, you grow it, you force them to interact with each other?
Yeah, I find the forced interaction doesn't work.
Yep.
And I've tried it unsuccessfully. I think to say, well, an example, I really need you to. Can you call this person and you guys go hang out at some point? Can you get the team to hang out together this weekend? And if a coach is asking that to happen, it's like, mom and dad asking you to go hang out with a kid that you don't really like as you're
down the
growing up.
street. Oh, you guys are the same age. You should go play
you should
outside
like
together.
each other, right?
Yeah.
But I think there's creative ways of going about it. Things like, in my world, it becomes very easy to have, group activities that go on in practice. I mean, it's an individual sport. Everything that we do generally is the person on the other side, I want to beat them, and they're on my team. But in practice, having ways where they're putting them on the doubles team together, putting them in a drill where if you don't do this, then this person doesn't win. Then all of a sudden you start to kind of foster that interaction. Some of that has to happen outside of the workplace. You do things creative. Yeah. And I would imagine the same thing. It's not like you can go and say, I'm a manager. I've got two people that don't seem to get along together. Let's just get more meetings together. Let's get more holiday parties together.
You guys go have lunch together and go. It doesn't work. You're right.
I'll give you a good example of that. I'm working with a nursing group right now in one hospital where one nursing manager, of course, their VP wants them all to be a team of nurse managers. And it's a noble thing to do, but they're not. And one person really stands out. Now, she's been a superstar. In fact, she's been held up by the VPs and others as this is the model. What a great job you've done, that type of thing. So much so that the other people don't like her.
There's resentment. Yeah.
So when they detected there was a lack of teamwork in the group, the vice president said, well, let's all get together one evening, go out to Outback or whatever and have a beer and eat together. Have some social time together, let her hair down. Well, this one manager told me, she said, well, I'm not going. It's on 1-to-1. I said, why not? She said, well, first of all, I don't like beer, and secondly, I don't like those people.
Kind of I'm 0 for 2 on this.
That's right. Yeah. The best of the world didn't happen there.
Yeah.
So, I can see that. And it's a complex world. It really is. It relates to leadership. It relates to the individuals in there. It relates to how you motivate people in one direction and how you get them to sacrifice something of themselves. I mean, the thing about take one for the team, here's a good example. I could never envision a group of true entrepreneurs being a team. The nature of the entrepreneur, the individual performer type of thing.
It'd be tough.
It's just contrary to. It's just totally contrary to the idea of a team.
Right.
Sharing, interacting, releasing some of your own control in favor of others. All those types of things. Brian, let me ask a question. Then I don't know. I don't want to interject here. I'll steer it, but I was curious about the effect of rewards and recognition about teams and team members. Do you recognize teams for their accomplishment, or do you recognize and reward individuals for their accomplishments?
I think you have to do both.
Really?
I think you have to do both. But I think the individuals. The sport world has changed dramatically in the last 30 or 40 years to where now people are ultra sensitive about giving the most valuable player award or ultra sensitive about giving the first place award. They want to make sure that there's a distribution of awards. Now there's the participation award,
everybody
the
gets one.
Sportsmanship award, that sort of thing. But and the reason being, I think, is that they didn't want people singled out, and they didn't want those individuals everyone else to feel as though they weren't worthy.
Yes, you got to get down the list too, and you get the award for being the last person to get an award.
Right. You were.
And I think that that's backfiring a little bit now, right? Is that you don't have individuals that are totally driven to be successful and kind of have that fire about them. So I think it's important to have a setup where their individual performance actually does stand out and they get recognized, whether that's rewarded or whether that's just accountable for what they do. But at the same time, I think you have to show that there's a benefit for having a team. Classic example of this I had a few years ago where, you mentioned you want the entrepreneurial people who really are not team players. Well, I think that a lot of times as a coach, people always think that the coach wants to have people that are so for the team that they don't care about themselves anymore. So sometimes they try to pretend like, oh, no, that's okay. Go ahead and take my spot. And tennis is a great example of this, right? We only get 6 people to play, 6 starting spots, and that seventh
out of a team
person.
Of how many? Like how many do you typically have on a team?
I have, say, 12 guys on a team.
So like half your team actually gets to play.
Yep, half will get to play in as a starting position. And as a coach, it's hard, but you kind of want both sides. You want someone who really wants the team to do well and understands if they're number 7 that day, but you also don't want that person wanting to be number 7. And there was a situation a couple of years ago where we were on a spring break trip. We were playing, multiple matches a day, and about the third match, I looked at one of my players who had been playing number 6 and said, We need to win this match, and number 6 is going to come down to your spot as being a very important play. Do you want that spot right now? Yeah. And he paused, and I think he was overthinking it, thinking, what does he want me to say? And he said, you know what, Colin, who was the person at number 7, he's playing pretty good. Why don't you let him take my spot? that sounds really great. And as a coach,
Right.
sometimes you're thinking, wow, you just made my job easy. But that made me look differently of that individual for the rest of the season. And he actually was benched for the next 3 or 4 matches because I wasn't sure if I could trust that he really wanted to be out there and had the killer instinct to be able to do it.
There's got to be some individual fire in there a little bit.
And the tough part, this is where the tough part of being a leader comes in, is you want them to be upset if they don't get that spot. You want them to be, you want them to be shooting for that recognition. And you want them not necessarily to be happy if they don't get it, but you also want them to respect the process of the fact that they didn't earn it.
It's almost like in the business world, you've got a team of people, you've got sales goals, you've got objectives, you've got project goals. Somebody would like a promotion, there's a promotion opportunity available. You want a team, you want members of your team that are all wanting that level.
Yeah.
And I could see in the same situation where somebody steps back and say, well, this person's probably better for that role than I am. So that person needs to get promoted. You don't want people who are going to be so passive about it, but you do want people, like you said, that if they get passed over and somebody else gets promoted, it's like, I get it. I understand, and it's best for the team. I'm going to keep working individually on what I want to get better on, but it's not going to turn into a sour grape situation because somebody else got chosen.
Well, and it's an issue of, are you going to get passed over and be motivated to do better next time, which means the leader has now done their job. Yeah. In my opinion, in the sports world, having someone not start or having someone not get a position they want, but be totally motivated to come back and be better, all of a sudden you've done a great job as a coach. Yeah. If you get the person to turn around and say, you know what, forget this guy. I'm not really interested in working for them anymore because obviously if they're not willing to be honest with themselves and realize why they didn't get it, then I think you've got a problem.
I think we're close to zeroing in on one of the main differences about teamship and team players in a sports venue, any type of sport, and in a from a healthcare environment or business healthcare, whatever, because the recognition that sports players get for doing well comes in 2 levels all the time. My win and loss record, our team's win and loss record, our position in the conference, those types of things, our position in the championship. That's automatic reinforcement and saying, okay, we're getting there, we're getting there type of thing. Or I did well. That's ever present. You mentioned a minute ago, Alan, about getting that promotion. Well, in healthcare sometimes and other business world, healthcare, the promotions are not something that takes place every day, every week, or whatever. It's years of difference in there. So how do you keep a person who's not getting promoted to still think team first? And part of that is what kind of measures do we give them to say we're doing well as a team? And a lot of times we don't have those metrics. I mean, okay, we discharge so many patients. Well, yeah, but that's what they're here for, is to get out of the hospital, that type of thing. Or our business metrics, okay, we did well financially last month, okay, but did we, or what was the cause of it? It's a much fuzzier terminology in terms of recognition and therefore a reward for the individual and the team, I think, in non-sports venues. That's why I like the idea of talking about teamship and because I think it's the purest form of teamship when you talk about sports analogies. I really do. Right. I can nitpick and say, well, in sports, track and field, that's not a team unless you're on the Olympic team or unless you're on a relay team. But you're right. It's about how we practice, how we train together, how we make each other better, even at things that we don't do the same way.
Right.
Better high jumper because this guy's a better broad jumper because we train together. We push each other. I like that. I just don't know where that fits in my world.
Sometimes. Well, and that's the part that you guys will have to kind of educate me on. It seems like how do you go about getting an individual's performance, whether it's not just the outcome. That's the other thing with sports is I think we've done a really good job of is recognizing that someone's attitude really made a difference for our team, giving things like most inspirational at the end of the year. Well, you know what? Maybe you didn't win everything, and that's certainly the win-loss that didn't show up, but yet there are ways that you made us better. And I think that's got to be important in the business world, right? Because, again, the promotion's not always going to be there. Yeah. The sale, you may have someone who, as a support staff, and they don't get to have the glory of the sale, right?
That's right.
But that support staff somehow there needs to be some accountability as to how do they how does what they do on a day-to-day basis result in our success?
Right.
That's why I like to use a term with managers a lot about recognizing employees' contributions rather than their performance.
Yep.
Performance means how I do against that measure. Contributions are what I brought to the table, to make a difference. Let's think for a minute. Right now, of course, it's holiday time. When this real time is holiday time, Christmas time for us. And the movie that's out now that everybody's going to, Brian, I know you've seen it with family. Brian, Alan, you've seen it yet? Louis Zamperini's
Unbroken.
Unbroken.
No, I have not.
Well, shame on you.
I know.
Okay.
Yes,
It should be. But to me,
If you want to just sit and drink a coffee for a minute,
Yeah,
we'll talk.
we'll just talk. I'm going to go take a
let
little
Brian
break.
and me talk. Yeah, just back out there, Alan's son. The Louis Zamperini. When you talk about making everybody else better, that's not a sports environment. He started out in sports, but that was individualized. There's no doubt about that. But in a prison camp, his strength, his endurance, his standing up to his captors in front of the others, do you think that helped them endure their captivity more?
Well, I would hope so. I would think so, right?
Yeah. I'm thinking so too. So to me, that's influence of a positive team player, not taking one for the team, but by doing so well themselves that they're an inspiration to others.
Yeah. Well, let me give you another sports connection. So same idea.
So you didn't like my
that was okay. It was okay.
Right.
But let's relate it to that situation. Is that they call it social facilitation, right? Is that, and we've done research on this. It's the most obvious research finding that you can have, that if you're around someone, your performance is going to be different if someone else is around than if you were alone. Period. Like every time that we've tested it, it's come true. So I could tell you, here's a force plate, and I want you to push on it as hard as you can and see how much force you can create. If you're here alone doing that, you're going to do it at a much lower level than if 4 of us were sitting here watching you, right? I mean, there's this idea of facilitating your performance by having other people around.
Right.
Well, that automatically tells us that we're going to do better, or we're actually going to do differently, I should say. Not always better.
Right.
There's also a kind of a social degradation that happens. But we're going to do differently if we have other people around us. So there's the benefit of, if I'm coaching this track team, then there's a reason why I want to have practice with everybody around and not just, let me go take you as an individual and go work with you. I can make you the best I could possibly do, but if you're also able to look over and see someone else doing really well and it motivates you to go faster. I mean, it all came about from cycling research, and they found that I could put someone on a track on a bike, and they would tell them to go as fast as they could go, and they would have a certain performance. But yet, if I put another person out there with them, all of a sudden they go faster. So there's more than 100% that they can give. So there's some benefit for having someone else doing the same thing you're doing, or doing it well to motivate you. And I think that's where businesses, putting people in silos is usually, I think there's some downsides to that.
That's a no-no, it is. Yeah. And,
so you want people being around others. I mean, so that situation in the movie, there's got to be some benefit from me seeing someone else perform and me getting motivated. Now, of course, that can be a downside if the performance is not a good thing. If I've got behaviors that are happening on my team, then everybody else is seeing those.
Well, you're pointing out something that's really a problem. Again, I'm coming from the healthcare world mostly, but I imagine it's true in all areas. And that is, so you, as a leader, do you try to build in inter-team competition? I mean, because we've always heard and been said, you don't do the silos. Here's nursing, here's radiology, here's lab, here's environmental services, and so on and so forth. Now, the silos, we've got to work together as a team, but rarely does that come about. Right. The objectives aren't the same sometimes.
Yeah.
And so when we're giving results back for a survey, for example, we're told really don't show to the whole group everybody's scores by department on certain things. Because it builds that competition, like, that way because such and such and all. So there is a mixed message there, I think, in that building in competition as a means to social facilitate betterment versus building in competition as a means of people's resentment.
Right.
I think a little bit of the difference there is that in a lot of the organizations, businesses, you don't always have those finely tuned teams where everybody's on the same page. There's an objective, a goal that everybody's striving for.
Yeah.
And I think if you had that situation across the board, you could show metrics across each of them and say, look, here's who's at the top, here's who's at the bottom. kind of like ranking on a team. You know, this is our number 1 player, this is our number 7 player.
Right.
But the difference in an athletic team is that those individuals who have been brought together, hopefully the goal is very focused. It's a very targeted goal. It relies on both individual and team performance. If we could create that same environment across an organization, then I think having that healthy in competition between groups and teams is good. I think it would actually work, and I think it would self-motivate. Unfortunately, a lot of organizations are not blessed enough to have every team working with a really solid, everybody in the group is on board. So then it becomes a little more nitpicking and infighting and resentment as opposed to an encourager to get stronger as a team. That's kind of the difference I see. And I'm sure there's some sports teams where having the ranked people on the team doesn't work because they're not all bought in. They're all performing at a very individual level. Yeah. And you got that same infighting and resentment. It's just, I think the ideal model is you should be able to show how each team's performing against each other as an encourager to the other ones. But that doesn't always work because of the teams that we've got built right now.
Well, and I would say that this is where a sport like tennis is different than even a sport like track, is that the beauty of, and honestly, I think it would be easier to motivate players on a track team than it is on a tennis team, mainly because, or I shouldn't say motivate. Motivate's going to be there, but I think to get them to work together as a team, because you can say, well, you're the sprinter, right? And you being a good sprinter isn't taking away from our good long distance person over here, right? Just like you can be a really good salesperson, and this person is our administrative staff. Right. You guys can both be excellent in your field and not take away from one another.
And it doesn't compete with one another.
And tennis is really, really tough, right? And to be able to say, well, you're number 1 and you're number 2. Number 2 knows that they're less than number 1, right? Yeah. I'm not saying you're this. So that's why a lot of times
dyslexic and think of number 2 as number 1.
And you know what? If they're golfers,
we're using new math. Maybe 2 is higher than 1. So,
But I think that's where my struggle often becomes is as a tennis coach, you have to find other roles for them. Well, you're our double specialist. Okay, you're our single specialist. And all of a sudden they've got ways of finding unique contributions. But I mean, you guys tell me, but in a corporate world, if you created a team, let's say in your current company, if you created a team, would it be all the salespeople together are a team because now they're competing? Yeah. Or would it be a salesperson with
well, that's the kind of team environment we have right now.
Hal Allen talked about that because that's what he set up this year.
Our teams are based on function as opposed to an objective of our service lines.
Project-based?
Yeah, as opposed to everybody that's in sales is a team together. Everybody that's a project manager is a team together. So if we have a team for our employee survey work, we have a team for our patient survey work, there is a salesperson in that team. There's project managers in that team. There's IT person in that team. So you can have the best of somebody in that team, the go-to person. The goal is that they know at the end of the year we want to hit these numbers, we want to have this performance, and we got to work as a team to get there.
And we don't have individual numbers. We don't, right?
No.
We have team numbers.
That's right. It's a team number. It's team objectives, team goals. Now, the challenge for us in that situation, which we're learning, this is the first year we've kind of structured our teams that way, the challenge is making sure we still have that individual recognition performance when there are not necessarily as many individual metrics to go after. So, yes, we know that this team as a whole, we want to bill out this much revenue, we want to have this kind of level of client retention. But because it is a team-based activity, who do you count client retention to?
Right.
Well, ideally it's the team, but yet if there's 6 people on the team and they all had a hand in it, how can you still, as an individual, give them some measurement of how they're doing? It becomes a little tougher.
Yep.
But I think it's a worthwhile challenge to have that team environment. I'd rather deal with how we figure out individual performance and let that be a challenge for us, as opposed to saying, well, we need to do away with teams and let's go back to individuals because that was a lot easier to measure individual performance.
Right. Well, and I think that's where we can start talking about the downsides of having a team as well. Yeah. Right, as you said, you could put this team together, but if you can't determine how each one of them is performing individually, then there's a really good opportunity for people to slack off and let someone else carry the weight. Right, that's one of the big negatives of team, and a lot of times it really comes down to the number of teams. So, how many people would be in your team?
Maybe like 5 or 6 people.
Okay, yeah, because that's the idea. If you make the teams too big, all of a sudden you get what we call social loafing or
social what?
Social loafing. So the more oftentimes you get multiple people together, it's the story that goes along with of the people that are looking out of a building window when someone's getting mugged in the street, and they all look down and look around and see that everybody else is seeing it as well, so nobody calls the cops. Right? It's the idea of saying, oh, well, somebody else has got
that covered.
Right?
We're all good.
It's the idea of, in the sport world, we often say the classic example is if we're doing a tug of war, right? I mean, Alan can pull 250 pounds. Dad can pull 250 pounds.
700.
Okay, yeah. And I can, pull
50, maybe 40,
but
50.
If you add those together, ideally, let's say if we all can pull 250 pounds, then ideally we should be able to pull 750 together. But unfortunately, you put us on a rope, and most likely we're going to pull less than 250 because we're assuming everybody else is helping out.
Yeah,
everybody else is doing some things. So all of a sudden, you get a large team. And the more people you have, the less effort each one puts into that. That's why football teams don't practice as a whole. They practice as offensive line, as wide receivers, as so on. So they want the social benefit, but they also don't want the loafing that goes along with, well, everybody else is doing the effort and I don't need to.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to take a quick break. When I come back, I want us to dig a little deeper into some of the downside of having teams and some other things to keep in mind with that. And then I want us to finish up the conversation, if we can, with some kind of do's and don'ts. When you're assembling your team, when you're working with your team, what are some things you really absolutely have to do? What are some things you need to make sure you avoid as well? So when we come back from the break, let's talk about those two topics, if that sounds good to you guys.
Good.
Sounds great.
Great. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back in just a moment with Leadership GPS, talking about teams. Are they important? Are they needed? And some of the differences between the corporate world and the athletic world. Here on the Mesh.tv, we'll be back in just a moment.
We'll get back to your show in a moment. Just a reminder, you're listening to The Mesh, an online media network of shows and programs ranging from business to arts, sports to entertainment, music to community. All programs are available on the website as well as through iTunes and YouTube. Find out more at themesh.tv and give us feedback on what you like. And now, as promised, back to your show.
Hello and welcome back to Leadership GPS here on themesh.tv, our online podcast network. Again, if you like the kind of conversation we're having here today, I do encourage you to go back and listen to old episodes of Leadership GPS. If you just can't get enough of the Alan and Tony Jackson show, hearing us talk about leadership, and man, we've got hours of stuff you can go back and listen to.
You'll be married to us for life.
It's actually a shame we're recording this after the holidays are done or winding down, because this would be a great way to spend your holidays, is to go back. I think we've got 30, 40 episodes.
I think you
can go back and listen to
across the universe that would spend their whole holiday season listening to hours of.
It's an entire weekend. I mean, you really could just listen to this stuff. So. What a great Christmas gift. Maybe past Christmas already, but keep it in mind for next year as well. But we do encourage you to go back either on the website, themesh.tv, or you can go to Apple iTunes, find Leadership GPS, and see all of our individual episodes ready to download for free, no cost to you whatsoever, and listen to at your own listening leisure on any device you choose. Well, let's get back into our topic here, guys. We were talking about this idea of teamwork, and we've got Brian Jackson with us, my brother, Dad's son, who from Oregon, visiting with us, and director of tennis and professor of kinesiology and, gosh, what's the other term you use there? Performance management, performance psychology,
sports psychology,
right.
Motor behavior. Yeah.
At Pacific University out in Oregon there. Joining us in this conversation talking about teams. What are they? How to make them work right? What are the differences between the sports environment and the business world, and what can we learn from one another in that situation? We talked a lot about some of the reasons to have a team. We talked about what teams are. We talked about some of the pros and positives you get from a team environment or a team culture. But we started to talk a little bit before the break about what were some of the downsides, maybe what could be the problems with a team environment. And Brian, I'm really just curious, in your world, what are some of the detriments of having a team culture? Especially when you've got strong individual performing athletes. What are some of the downsides of a team? What could come out of that maybe is not the desired effect?
Well, one we started to talk about before the break was the idea that, typically the larger the group, the less people give within that group, and it's you've got to kind of weigh the idea of, if I have this group together, they're going to learn from each other. There's going to benefit from each other, potentially going to raise each other's game. But there's also a possibility that they're going to stop giving the max effort because everybody else is there. And in coming up with ways in which they all can see their individual contribution. If you don't have that, oftentimes you've got people that will slack off. You've got people that will go to practice and therefore realize, well, I don't have to give everything because, there's plenty of people here to take the time. They're the ones you turn around and all of a sudden they're wandering and doing other things because they're not as accountable. They're not getting your utmost attention. It's
kind of like what we run into a lot of times with department meetings of employees or team meetings. The larger the numbers, you got 40 people sitting in a room. Yep. There's going to be those on the front rows and those talkers, and everybody else is sitting there and saying, well, I'm sure they'll talk about it. Yeah, they already talked about that.
Yeah.
I have to contribute. But if it's 5 people or 6 people or 7 people, the obligation is more on me. Yeah.
It's kind of like in college when you've got a large lecture hall class versus a really small class. Yep. You can kind of hide in the back of the class, and you figure, well, I can talk to some of my fellow students and make sure I know what I need to know for the test, but you're not getting your full impact out of it. Small group, it's a little hard to be invisible from that. So.
Well, and obviously the balance there is, in a business, you obviously don't want to take those 40, 50 individuals and then say, well, let's just break them up into meetings of 4 people apiece because now you've got 10 meetings. So you've got to do the balance of what's the size to where I can keep their attention, but yet also be efficient in my time, right? And not spending my entire time breaking things up across
But I think it's a rule to remember about if you're wanting to forge strong teamwork, keep it as small as possible.
Small the better. Yeah, I mean, again, a meeting with you, Alan, as a president of a company, if someone comes and meet with you, they're going to be much more on task and accountable because there's nowhere to hide.
That's right.
And there's, it's basically, this is all my attention, and I know everything that comes out of this meeting is based on me,
right?
As opposed to a meeting with, 10 individuals. That's why, every year I won't just have team meetings. That's a nightmare. You'll end up losing the accountability. You have to have individual meetings. You still have to meet with them. You have to make sure that you're giving them face time and assuring them that, yes, I see what you're doing, good and bad, and I want to make sure that that we're accountable here. And the things you've done that have gone well, here's how it's benefited us.
So can we actually see that as a little bit of I want to say it's not a negative. It's just something that leaders need to keep in mind is extra work. In that you've got 2 levels of accountability you've got to manage. You've got to manage the team environment, and you still have to keep a level of management on individual.
Right.
Because if you just say, well, I'm just going to coach the team and let them go do their thing, you're going to trip up somewhere on the individual side.
Yep. You're going to lose some that are not as motivated, and as ideal as it would be to say that all of my team is motivated individually to be the best they can be, that's not the case, and that will never be the case. Some of them have different goals and aspirations than others. So I'd say that's a negative, the size, if it gets too big, but then the flip side, you're going to have to spend more time. I'd also say, we talked about it before, a team environment means all of us, the benefit is that they gain from each other. The downside means they could gain from each other in a negative way.
Sure. That's true. You put people in a team and you've got one bad seed or you've got somebody in there that's expressing a attribute that you really don't want to have shared. Well, you're forcing these people to be in a team.
Yep.
It's going to be a lot easier to spread that negative attribute a little bit more. Dad, what about from your standpoint? Anything you see where teams kind of backfire or could be problems for individuals working in?
Well, I think it probably just an elaboration of what Brian identified, where a team actually becomes a negative team, and it's because of lack of direction, lack of clarity of goals by the leader. They're kind of left to their own devices. I remember back, and I probably used this example a long time ago in one of our other podcasts, which I'm sure everybody out there in listener land has listened to. But when I worked in a cotton mill when I was in college and worked every weekend and holidays and all that sort of stuff, and boys, I did that back then to support you guys. Remember that?
Yes,
Is that the one you walked uphill both ways to get there,
yes,
correct?
That's right.
right.
Yeah, that gray you see in my hair is lint. It's not gray hair. But we had people who really, to say that they were a team was probably inappropriate, right? And to say that they were individual high performers was not. But people wanted to be more of their colleagues, more associated with their colleagues than they did with expectations of leadership, the manager. We could have cared less what Robert Reynolds, the supervisor, wanted us to do on that third shift, running a machine called Mangler, and to meet his goals for us. Mm-hmm. What motivated us and made us more feel a part of something was when Shorty and the other 6 guys that had been there 40 years running those same machines would walk across the aisleway and talk to Dolan and me, and we became part of that group. Mm-hmm. We could care less what the supervisor thought of us. Mm-hmm. So sometimes it's a matter of what the nature of the existing group is that people want to be a part of. If it's a negative culture, and it happens in healthcare, it happens in other areas, each department has its own subculture or its own team, if you would, team effect. If that happens to be negative, people want to be a part of more of that, even if it is negative. So it's a powerful motivator. Yeah. To be a part of a group of people is a very powerful motivator. Secondary question is that a positive group or a negative group?
Yeah.
So that's a potential downfall.
Well, and I've got a question, too, that probably relates a little more to the sports world than it does the corporate world. But you've got your superstar performers, mm-hmm. your guys who are coming into a team, and they are lighting it up on their own individual stats. They come from let's say in a high school where they were number one in their whole state, for example. Mm-hmm. Come to a school to play, a college, university to play, and to work in a team, sometimes that's going to hamper their own individual performance. I mean, they're not going to put up the same individual stats they had because now the expectation is they play in a team.
Oh, maybe it's like a Johnny Manziel type of thing on a higher level?
A little bit like that. I mean, you've got a little bit of those individual performance situations. I even think about it in terms of Miami Heat. You packed in just the superstars and, it didn't really meet the expectations of a lot of the fans because you think, well, I'm just going to throw all these superstars in. But I think the trade-offs there of them trying to work as a team didn't always gel as well. Mm-hmm. So is that a detriment as well? Do you risk losing some of your top performers or not getting them to join the team in the first place because you've relied too heavily on a team environment in a situation?
Well, I think yes, you do run the risk of kind of keeping everyone down to the average level, right? I mean, if you're teaching to the group rather than teaching to the individual, then they're probably not getting what they need. But you also, you run the risk of losing motivation. Mm-hmm. I mean, the thing you bring up, which is kind of interesting, is in a team environment, usually the best player automatically becomes an emerging leader, mm-hmm. even if they don't say a word, right? Everybody looks at that person as, well, they're really good, so I'm going to follow them. So to me, they're the most important part of your group. Mm-hmm. When you get that individual in, you've got to make sure they're exhibiting behaviors that you really appreciate and value as a coach or as a leader. If you bring in a hotshot salesperson, right, you got to realize that person automatically is going to be looked at positively and negatively. Everyone's going to be looking to them. They're either going to look at them as that's the goal and I want to be like that person, or they're going to look at them as that person is threatening what I do.
Yeah, that person took a spot away.
So you've got to make sure that person is, oftentimes it's giving one for the team, right? You need someone in that position who's willing to give for the team more than any other position.
So instead of just looking for somebody with the best numbers on a sheet of paper, it's going to have to be somebody who can also resemble the emerging leader role that you need, that they're naturally going to take on.
Well, that brings up another point. I need an answer from each of you on this. Do you think it's more difficult to manage or coach a team of superstars, all of them superstars, or a team of good players?
Well, I'll say it's definitely easier to manage a team of good, solid players that work together well than it is individual superstars. You may not get the numbers you want and the performance, the records you want right off the bat, but I got to imagine in the long run, you're going to be better suited for it.
It's easier and it's more enjoyable.
So you can have, even though the objective as a team is to push each other to higher levels of contributions, there's a saturation point where you got too many superstars.
Yep.
Well, even in a corporate world, and I know the superstar thing doesn't apply as much in a corporate world as it does athletics, but let's say you bring on a really high-level, top-notch performing salesperson in a role. They're a superstar. They are heads and shoulders above anybody else you've got in your organization. If you get fortunate enough for that person to also be a good team player, then you're solid. I mean, you're good. They're going to elevate everybody else. However, if they're focused on, I want my own numbers, I'm not always going to work the process with the rest of the team as I should. I'm not going to involve everybody else. Those are the ones that are probably more likely to leave quicker too. In other words, I found another opportunity where I can make even more money, so I'm ready to jump ship and go. And then for a company or a business, that actually puts you in a worse situation than you were beforehand. Not only did you bank on a superstar, that superstar's now left because they weren't part of that team.
True.
So I actually see real danger with that. So I'd rather go with somebody that maybe doesn't have the top performing numbers, but you got a sense that that person is going to be that right emerging leader within that team to set the right tone and work with the rest of the team.
Well, I can say my best teams have been the ones where I don't think we had the standouts. We had the solid middle players, and they all were pushing each other to be better because they all wanted to be the standout. And that's always exciting, too, when you've got people at the same level that are all wanting to be potentially the standout, but at the same time they're happy working with each other versus the person who is the standout, knows it, it's obvious, and then it's really hard to keep the others motivated, to stay in line with that.
Yeah.
So it sounds like we're saying that having a team in most situations is a good objective to shoot for, that a team motivates itself, they push each other through that social affiliation and modeling to higher levels of contribution on an individual, which makes the whole team rise. But there can be disadvantages of trying to force a team into the wrong mold or the wrong mold.
It's understanding that there's a lot more leadership involvement in managing a team than just having a bunch of talented individuals. The effects sound like in the long term are much greater and much more positive, but it is a lot more work as well.
That brings up a point. I mean, a lot of times, Brian, you know that I'm brought into healthcare environments to do leadership coaching, people say. And I always tell them, no, I'm not a coach. Coaches are there every day watching the plays evolve, watching the performance come out, they're watching the contributions. Step in, it's just like pulling the wide receiver who ran a bad route over the sideline and said, no, you do it this way on the spot, rather than the day labor like us that come in as consultants once in a while to do something. So we're more leadership consultants. But I made a note up here, said that the manager equals coach a lot of times in a healthcare environment. That we always think of coaches in healthcare and business environments as people who are one-up leaders above a work group, the coaches, and the coach above them is a person above them, that type of thing. So to me, the question is, do you coach a team or do you coach individuals? In the tennis world and sports world, do you coach a team or do you coach individuals?
It's a good question. I mean, I think you have to do both, right? If you do one or the other, I think you're going to fail. If you just say, I'm going to go into my tennis team and I'm going to coach these individuals and have individual lessons and workouts, I think you're going to fail in the long run with the motivation that goes to working with each other. I mean, I think they see their own purpose, but they don't see the greater good. And if you just go in and say, we're going to work as a team, then you run the risk of the really good player falling back to the pack,
leveling
and
out,
the lowest level player not being able to pull up. You end up seeing a lot of kind of reverting to the mean, which is not always what you want. You want everybody striving to be that high level player.
Yeah, we call that in the other world leveling down. The superstar up here, if there's not the rewards, recognition, and things coming their way for being that good, like a pay performance system in healthcare or management or whatever, when you're paying for performance, if everybody gets paid the same, they just get across the board raises, no differentiation. Person up there is about to say, so what good does it do me?
Right.
I just drop my level down to what everybody else is doing.
Yep. So
Same thing happens in sports.
Well, and there's got to be a combination of the two, right? I mean, you need that individual striving for something to differentiate them. But for me, it's a position on the team. It's a record. But at the same time, you need them recognizing that there is something greater than just that rewards for myself, and there's something more to be gotten there. That's why I think it comes back to, I mean, one of the most important tools that let's say a sports psychologist has when they go and talk to coaches or to players is always the idea of setting goals. And so those goals have to be set accordingly. You can't just go to say your goal is as a team, we have to win the championship. Well, if you do that, nobody knows what it is that they're supposed to do individually.
Right, their contribution.
And they also don't know what they're supposed to do tomorrow, right? I mean, if you're saying the first day of practice, we're going to win the championship, that's our goal. well, what do we do tomorrow?
Yeah.
I don't understand what we do
But
tomorrow.
I think especially for your 7, 8, 9, 10 player,
Yep.
they're saying,
What's
okay, what do I do about
what's
that?
my job?
Yeah.
None of mine counts.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I get that.
So those short-term small goals, individual goals that then contribute. So the idea would be, well, I want to win the championship. Let's break it down to, now, Alan, your goal is this within that. And if you do that, you're going to help to the piece of the pie. That
Everybody plays their part. We as a team hit the overall goal that we're looking for.
Key question again for you guys. Once a team, always a team?
No, not necessarily. I mean, I think for the duration of that objective, that goal, whatever it may be, you've got a team environment. But I don't think it has to be an expectation that team always has to be together. I could see once objectives are met, things are ready to move on.
But once you've built a
reshaping
group
goal.
of people into a team, is it fair to assume they're always going to be a team?
Oh, no. I think it still has to be managed on a regular basis, right?
Yeah, there has to be work along the way, right? I mean, that the idea of it. Well, take professional sport teams, right? And a lot of times they don't change members that often, not as often as a college team would. With it gets new people every year, but they go through ebbs and flows, and then one year they find out that this person is upset about their contract and needs a little bit more recognition, whereas last year they were totally fine with where they were. I think you have to continue to nurture. That's why it has to be coaching rather than simply just
And then
come
you've
in and fix
got
it.
injuries, or people leaving a team that's like forces the rest of the team to have to even strengthen what they're doing as a team.
Yeah.
Well,
there's got to be a constant management of that.
Some of the organizational behavior theory says that teams evolve from an immature group of people to a synergistic team, kind of diagonal line across two axes, one of which is communications and the other work processes. How we do what we do and how we interact with each other. And when those melt together and you got the same group of people and the same objectives, the same lack of threats or whatever, the same access to resources, all those things that could play into falling back from a team, then eventually it can not only be just an effective team, it can be a synergistic team where 2 + 2 = 5 or more, right? But as you were saying, Alan, every time there's a change in the membership of that team, you start back to the immature group.
Sure.
Because you have to rebuild it.
Yep.
You add players or you take away players. You add employees, you take away employees. You got the wrong mix, the teams that lose a quarterback to an injury type of thing. Or you graduate your players. Every year you got to rebuild a team, starting from scratch, don't you?
Yep.
That's why I even look at like a college basketball program like Kentucky, where it's just we're going to stock up with these high school grads that we know are only going to be here for a year or two, maybe 2. They're the superstars. We're going to recruit them. We're going to get them here. We know they're only going to be around a short period of time. So where a lot of college teams, I mean, granted, over the years, it's gotten a shorter and shorter window. It used to be you coach a team and you kind of knew you had those players for 3 or 4 years. When you're now shortening it down to 1 or 2 years, you've got to really maximize your efforts in making that team work for 1 year, knowing that next season you're going to have to rebuild from scratch almost constantly. That's got to be an incredible challenge, I think, in the college level because you are dealing with a time limit. It's not like pros where they could be there 10, 12 years. Even high school, too, same idea. There's a time limit to how long you have those people.
Right.
In the workforce, in the corporate world, the challenge we have is people can leave, go to other jobs. People could find a better opportunity. And then you're back to having to rebuild that team again because of that missing piece or different personnel involved.
Or worse, they mentally leave the job but physically still here.
So basically they're here, but yet you're not hitting those same
Like a
goals you're
bench
ever
player.
getting before.
And that's where coaches, probably the same as managers and as directors, it's a nonstop. It's a nonstop
constant.
deal. You're the coaches that know they need to get out of the coaching world are the ones that feel like, well, I've created it and now it's going to run itself.
Yeah.
Yep.
And if you think that's the case, then I mean it's like
That's what I'm
running
saying.
running a
Once
race
a
up the
team,
hill.
always a team is not-
You can't
not
stand
effective.
still on the hill. If you stop moving, if you stop being nimble, if you stop trying to reinvent the wheel. Now, I will say on the flip side, if you do a couple of things the right way, get the right people in, some of it does take care of itself. And what you want is you want to be pulling the strings from behind the scenes to where they feel as though it all kind of worked out for them, and they all tend to, have something that they're driving for themselves. So,
Good.
Just to kind of wrap up our conversation, I want to get some kind of quick hits from you guys, some kind of do's and don'ts. I mean, we a lot of them are going to be probably recapping of what we already talked about in our conversation. But, if I were to ask you guys, what are some of the top most important things to remember that you always need to do in managing and keeping a strong team? And then we're also going to counter with what are some of the things to make sure you don't do with regards to a team. It could be some recapping of what you guys have talked about, or it could be some new things altogether. Who wants to start off? Who's got a good do? Something that really needs to be
I've got,
done.
of course, me. You me. I got
You got your bulleted
I got 8
list
of them
on the
already,
notepad.
but I'll just do one. I'll do one. Then Brian, you want to take one?
Sounds good. See where it goes.
All right. Where to start? These are all so good.
You're trying to pick your favorite
the
one,
best
right?
One.
Yeah.
Well, the best one. They're all just equal level there. They're all superstars. Well, one thing we did say, you stand a better chance of building a team when you keep it small focused.
Smaller teams.
Well, not only in terms of members of the team, as long as it's efficient to do that, but also small in focus.
Yeah.
Keep people in narrow focus. This is what we're after. That hill right now, okay? That game. The next game is the most important. You've always heard that in football or anything else. I would like to look in the championship, look in the next game. Well, bull feathers. That's not always true, but it sounds good, and it probably works. Our focus is short term and narrow, and therefore we can measure our performance against that, and do that. Brian, take it on. So keep it small. Go ahead.
I'm just really happy I heard bull feathers.
This is a PG show. We keep it pretty low key.
And you are my sons, so I can't be doing the other words.
Yeah. Well, using a sports term, I'd say make sure you spend a lot of time, effective time, recruiting the right people. For me, recruiting the right people doesn't just mean looking at the hot shots. That's always the way I recruit initially. I go to see who has the highest ranking, who's the best player.
You've got to start at some point, yeah.
But the most important thing that I find is getting the current people of that team involved in making sure that there's a connection there. And so for me, my step is always go out and find the best talent, bring them on campus, and if they don't get along with everyone else, if they don't fit into that mold, see you later. Right? They're not someone you want, because you don't want to make your team conform to someone else. You want to have them. If your team's going the right direction, you want the right personalities.
And I would imagine, Brian, this is actually a question I was going to ask earlier. I would imagine having a strong team that is visible, that somebody new, a recruit that you're talking to, comes and visits and sees that team environment, is a better recruiting tool than seeing a bunch of individuals that are kind of on their own tracks, right?
Incredibly, yeah. I mean, and that's typically what I get, right? Is I'll get someone that comes and stays overnight and does their campus visit, and usually if I'm going to get them, they're going to tell me, the guys were just great. Yeah, the team was great. This is, it has I just really enjoyed. They don't even talk about tennis. Well, and certainly don't talk about me, right? It's usually in spite of me, right? But they won't say, oh my gosh, I'm really challenged by the team on the court. And,
I love the facility that we be practicing.
I think I could be number one.
Yeah.
If someone says that, then that's not the person I want. If they say, oh, I loved the team. I thought it was really cool. I thought they all, and great to be around. That, as long as I knew that also the players then came to me and said, this person's going to make us better. And that's what I look for. Is this person going to make us better?
Feedback from the other team members
totally.
To see it.
Yeah, and I'll take that over anything else. And so I would say in the business world, get the team members involved in new people coming in, making sure that if you've got the culture set up the way you want, make sure that personality is something that really is really high on the list.
If everything's working right, your coworkers, your team members should be able to give you that same feedback when a new recruit's looked at or a new hire, say, that person will fit here really well.
And the only time that's different is when you're trying to improve what you do as a group, which I assume is always the case.
It's not always trying to fit them into the group if the group's not quite where you want it to be.
Be very careful about getting someone who is so far beyond what you currently have, whether it's motivation or whatever, because that will cause the bad apple.
And that type of phenomenon, and it's probably a crude example, but when you're looking at a work group or a team, if they're all superstars and you reward the superstar of the superstars, okay, fine, no problem. Everybody's getting a reward. But if everybody is, the norm is subpar, nobody's really good, and you still have to reward individual effort, then you're probably rewarding the cream of the crop rather than cream of the crop. That happens.
Rewarding mediocrity, that's not an enjoyable place to
All right, it's my time, right?
Yep, sure, go for it.
So we've had keep it small, sharp focus. We've had hire for fit or, promote for fit, bring them into that. The next one for me is keep the expectations clear. That's the job of the coach or the manager, is keep expectations about being a team player. I think it's okay to fully expect and demand that people be a team player. But people have to translate that. What does that mean? What does it mean? What does it mean, like I said, tomorrow for me? Right. What's my contribution? Okay.
Well, and just as an example of that, because you guys talked about a movie that I had not seen yet, so I'm going to talk about a movie I know you guys have seen just because I saw it recently with my kids, and to me, it's still one of the best examples of a coach forcing teamwork in a way without it being that we have to be friends. It's forcing that respect level and knowing that, kind of setting the expectations of this is how we're going to be as a team.
So you're talking about Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer.
I am, absolutely. How'd you guess? Perfect. Remember the Titans football film, where the integration of predominantly black, predominantly white high schools and coming together to play. They had to kind of get these guys respecting one another. The coach never once said, I want you guys to be friends. Right. He made opposite players room together with the expectation of, I want you to learn about them and report back to me something about their life. Again, he wasn't saying go out and hang out and be friends and go to the malt shop together, whatever. It was know about them and report back to me. That's the expectation.
But he was creating a team structure where team work could evolve out of that.
Exactly.
With structure.
And it wasn't forcing them to be friends. It was forcing them to respect one another and learn about each other. And that was the expectation, is that you're going to learn about them. Yeah. And he knew that there was a good chance that many of them would start to bond a little bit stronger because of that. So it's that expectation of this is what we expect as a team. It's not being unrealistic and not saying you got to be friends and go out and hang out all the time. It's here's how we're going to be as a team. This is the expectation I've got.
Well, it's also respecting differences between people, respecting their contribution levels, no matter what level it is, that type of thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Brian, you got another one for us?
Well, I was just, we mentioned it a little bit earlier, but I wanted to reiterate. You need to make sure that there are group goals and individual goals together, and ways of separating yourself individually, or I should say rewarding yourself individually, being accountable individually, while having a balance of making sure that you're working to see what the team does. That person who creates the highest, sales result of the quarter also needs to see whether or not that sales goal helped anyone else. And if they can't see that, well, I just hit 100%, and these people are all down at 25%. If he would have, or he or she would have done a different way of approaching that to where he brought everybody else up, then that's a more positive way of going about it. So you got to make sure that there's ways of seeing what you do and how that can be rewarded individually versus also seeing that what I do individually can actually help a greater good, and you need to be able to draw connection.
So it's kind of managing both levels of that. It's both the individual and the team. You can't have one or the other.
I would imagine in the corporate world you cannot have just one or the other.
If you just manage a team, it's individually you're going to lose some people. You're going to lose some motivation on the individual side. If you just manage individuals, then as a team, they're not working together, and you're fragmented as well.
Because that also blends together the reward and recognition concept. Individual reward and recognition. And I see no problem doing that in front of team members, recognizing individual team members, or having stats and metrics that would do that. But you also have to have goals and objectives that are clear for the team. And when we do our parts well, this is what we can get to. Yeah. And you celebrate those things.
Sure. I don't know if you guys have any other dues to list, but let's just kind of go through and hit some of those a little bit
Sounds
more.
Like real quickly,
two other things, I think.
Okay.
Or three things. One of which, it's a constant building process. Once a team, always a team is not a truism. We've got to always stay on top of it. Different pressures on the team, changing the membership of the team, different resources to train the team, what it might be. If you're short-staffed in a department for too long, your teamwork drops. Yeah. When in the short run, it surges. We're going to make up for each other's, snow days outside. They can't get in here. That's fine. No problem. We'll carry the ball. But let it snow for 15 days in a row.
Yeah. The team starts to fray pretty quick.
Yeah. The other thing that I had, other than a constant building process, was that you have to, as a coach or manager, and that's a point I think. A manager is a coach and a coach is a manager. You have to manage teamwork, but you also have to coach it. Manage is creating that structure, that framework, like we're talking about the Titans and so on and so forth. The coaching is individual as well as team, painting the picture where we can be, where we ought to be, where you can be, and motivation there. But you have to deal with that aggressive of that certainty of the non-team player. When you're sure that guy, that gal is not on board and never going to be, it's their choice. You got to deal aggressive with that. Yeah. Rather than having it taint the team. So that's what I bring up.
Ryan, you got any other dues for you? We got them all covered.
No, I think We've covered the majority.
I mean, we've covered a lot throughout the conversation.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you guys can think of that we need to express that to make sure you don't do? I mean, again, we've already talked about a lot of those things, but just any closing notes on things when managing a team that you need to make sure you don't do and you avoid if at all possible.
I can't think of any don'ts. I would encourage every person who's in a leadership position to be critically mindful of the benefits of creating a team in any role. And that's something you have to keep being mindful about. It's not something that comes naturally. Usually we're just satisfied with everybody's out there doing their job. Okay, fine. End of the day, everybody's gone. Show up tomorrow, good. Well, you got a good team? Oh, yeah. Or is it just a group of good employees, you know? Yeah. Teamwork is special. Teamship is a special attribute of a group of people.
The one thing I'll say on a don't side of things is don't assume as a leader that just because you set up your team that it's kind of hands off for you, that all of a sudden that your job is done.
That's right.
Kind of that constant management you said, but also just even that mentality of, well, I've got the team, they're going to do their stuff, they've got their goals. I'm just going to sit back and watch it happen. Yeah. And if it doesn't happen, then I'll figure out something. Yeah. No, it's a constant process, and that's something that I know is tough with time requirements and everything else in a lot of busy organizations. But you build a team, it does add more complexity to your role as a leader. But you got to look at it as this will be something that will benefit our organization much, much better if I put the time into building the team as well as managing individual performance on things.
Yeah.
And I would just say on the don't, one of the key elements with a coach is that don't say things that you're not going to back up. Mm-hmm. And if you do really believe, let's say in my position, if I really do believe that effort is something that I care about and being a great team member is something I care about, well, I need to reward that. I can't go to someone and say, gosh, I really love the way you've been working, but I'm still going to keep that lazy person who's the better player in the lineup.
It's mixed messages.
You can't give them mixed messages because that will come back and bite you, and the whole team environment will fall apart. So, set up your culture the way that you want it and stick with the culture. And sometimes that means potentially less productivity in the short term, but greater productivity in the long term.
Well, I think that's a challenge for a lot of leaders too, is realizing sometimes when you build a team, you're not going to get those results you want immediately. If you're building a really good team, it will take a while.
It takes time.
And I think there's sometimes a lot of impatience out there. People want the superstars quickly. They want to build a rock star team of just high performers without necessarily building it into a team culture. You may get some very flash in the pan quick results, but you're not going to get the longevity you need on it. So, guys, thanks so much for the conversation today. I thought this was great. And Brian, appreciate you flying all the way from Oregon just to come record this show. This is really impressive. Yeah. The dedication, I'm telling you as an individual, I appreciate your performance in coming here to North Carolina and your performance on today's podcast. Dad, individually, you did great on today's podcast as well. I really appreciate your performance. Yeah, today. I mean, and in general as well.
Okay,
so
good.
I think that's overall.
And as a team.
We were a good
really
team.
Well.
We were a good team for the last hour.
That was great.
Good. Well, this has been Leadership GPS. This is, again, our ongoing podcast audio discussion about the world of leadership and how you can affect change in your organization as a leader, or if you're looking to evolve from a supervisor, employee, manager role into a stronger leader for the organization you belong to. I'm Alan Jackson with the Jackson Group, Tony Jackson with Drive Leadership. You can learn more about Drive Leadership at driveleadership.com, or just go to the Jackson Group and ask about it there. We have information on both websites there. Mm-hmm. I'm at the Jackson Group, which is thejacksongroup.com, about employee and customer satisfaction surveys and experience surveys. And then our guest, Dr. Brian Jackson from Pacific University out in Forest Grove, Oregon. Thanks for being here. Feeling good about your season coming up? I guess you got both seasons, both men and women's seasons coming up.
Yeah, we've got moving in the right direction. So
good.
It's going to be
always good
an
to see.
exciting year.
You might want to give your email address in case any of our listeners out there want to dialogue with you by email about any of your points today. What is it?
Well, my email address is Brian Jackson, BRIAN, Jackson at pacificu.com. Or .edu, sorry.
PacificU.edu.
PacificU for university.edu. Great. Yes. We'll make sure we put that in the little description notes on the show episode as well for that. So
thanks, guys.
And it's B-R-I-A-N, right? Not B-R-Y-A-n or not B-A-B-R-A-I-N, as somebody called you one time. Brian Jackson.
Well, you spelled with an I? Oh, shoot. I've been doing that wrong for about 40-some years now. So.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. Thank you, Brian's son and Alan's son.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody, for listening. We'll talk to you next time.
Thanks,
Take
guys.
care. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to The Mesh, an online media network of shows and programs ranging from business to arts, sports to entertainment, music to community. All programs are available on the website as well as through iTunes and YouTube. Check us out online at themesh.tv. Discover other network shows and give us feedback on what you just heard.